Welcome back to the deep dive. Most people have this really fundamental idea about human biological sex. It's simple, male or female, binary.
Right. It seems straightforward.
But today we're diving into a stack of sources that honestly just blow that idea apart. They show there are at least 28 documented ways human sex development can actually happen.
That's really the core takeaway for you today. Our research shows it's way beyond just XX or XY. Biological sex is, well, it's more like a spectrum, governed by chromosomes, sure, but also genes, hormones, all interacting in these incredibly varied ways.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's look at a real-world case. This one really highlights the complexity right away. It's from 2014 in Jammu and Kashmir, India. Doctors are prepping a 70-year-old man for just a routine hernia repair. This guy, he's seemingly typical male, married, father of 4 kids.
Yeah, sounds completely standard. Until they operated. And they found something totally unexpected. Inside his abdomen, right there in the hernia sac, were female reproductive organs, a uterus, and fallopian tubes.
Wait, how is that even possible? He presented as fully male externally.
Exactly. Medically, it's called persistent Mullerian duct syndrome, or PMDS. To get it, you have to think back to how embryos develop.
Okay.
Every fetus initially has the basic plumbing for both male, the Wolffian ducts, and female, the Mullerian duct systems. For a typical male development, the testes need to do 2 key things. Make testosterone, obviously, but also something called anti-Mullerian hormone, AMH.
AMH. That sounds crucial here.
It absolutely is. AMH is the signal that tells the body, okay, dissolve those early female structures, we don't need them. In PMDS, something goes wrong with either producing AMH or the body's ability to respond to it.
So the male development continued on the outside because of testosterone.
Precisely. But inside, those Mullerian structures, the uterus and tubes, they just persisted. They never got the signal to go away.
Wow, that one case alone just shows biological sex isn't some simple A or B choice. So if we look at the bigger picture, how common are variations like this? What percentage are we talking about?
Well, if you use a broad definition, like the one in the American Journal of Human Biology, which looks at chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy, the estimate is around 2% of the global population.
2%?
Yes.
It's huge. That's like 160 million people worldwide.
It is. It's a massive number.
Which makes you wonder, why don't we hear about this more? If it's potentially affecting 160 million people, why isn't it part of our everyday understanding?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our sources suggest 2 big reasons. First, many, maybe most of these variations are internal, hidden. You might have a chromosomal variation or a hormone receptor difference that just never causes any obvious external signs or functional issues.
So the person might live their whole life and never even know.
Exactly. They just don't know. And the second reason, it's the heavy social stigma. Differences in sex development are often seen as taboo, something to be concealed, kept silent. That pressure is immense.
Okay. So our mission today is really to get into the science behind this complexity, maybe dispel some of that silence. Where do we start, historically?
I think we have to start there. The foundation for understanding all this really begins with discovering chromosomes and their variations. This takes us back to the 1940s, specifically 1942 with Klinefelter syndrome.
Right. Named after Dr. Harry Klinefelter. He reported on 9 male patients, right? They came to him seeking help for infertility.
That's the one. And he noticed they shared some common traits.
Things like breast development, smaller tests, problems with sperm production. But the actual cause wasn't figured out for quite a while longer.
No, it took another 17 years. It wasn't until 1959, after we'd confirmed humans have 46 chromosomes, that researchers finally found the link. These patients had 47 chromosomes, specifically 47 XXY.
That extra X chromosome, what does it do?
It generally leads to lower levels of male hormones. Physically, that often means things like longer arms and legs, less muscle mass, less body hair, often a younger-looking appearance, too.
And infertility is common, though you mentioned not always.
Correct. The research notes about half might still be able to conceive. But there are often cognitive challenges, too. Sometimes weaker language skills, learning disorders, maybe a higher risk for anxiety or depression. It's surprisingly common, affecting about 1 in 600 male newborns.
And that same year, 1959, was huge, because that's also when we got the discovery of Turner syndrome, kind of the flip side.
Exactly. Charles E. Ford reported on a 14-year-old girl who had only 45 chromosomes, just a single X. It was the first confirmed case of someone surviving with only one X chromosome labeled 45X.
And Turner syndrome presents differently. Short stature, lack of menstruation, and breast development,
Right.
usually infertility without medical help.
Right. And also an increased risk for certain health issues like heart defects, type 2 diabetes, thyroid problems.
What about cognitively? You mentioned Klinefelter's language challenges.
With Turner syndrome, it often involves difficulties with spatial visualization. That can make learning maths harder. They're also more prone to things like chronic ear infections and hearing loss. But the good news is that early treatment, usually starting around 11 or 12 with estrogen therapy, can make a really significant difference.
Okay, so those are two big ones from 59. Then we have 47,000 XYY, sometimes called supermale syndrome, discovered a couple of years later, 1961.
Yeah, this one often presents with being tall, maybe slender, but strongly built. Now, there was this really unfortunate period in the 60s.
Yeah, the aggression link.
Exactly. Some early, frankly flawed studies suggested the extra Y made individuals more aggressive or prone to violence. It caused a lot of stigma.
That's been debunked, right?
Completely overturned by better research. Any challenges are usually pretty mild, maybe slight weaknesses in some social or cognitive skills, but nothing like the early sensationalism suggested.
Good to clarify that. And the other side of that coin, also with 47 chromosomes, is 47XX or trisomy X.
Right, sometimes called super female in the past, but that's really misleading. They aren't more female. In fact, this variation is often so mild or completely asymptomatic that many people with 47,000 XXX never even know they have it.
So what are the common traits, if any?
Often taller than average height, maybe some mild delays in motor skills or language development early on, possibly some learning difficulties. Sometimes they might experience early menopause, what's called premature ovarian insufficiency.
Okay, so those are the, let's call them foundational 4 chromosomal variations. But you said 22 variations based just on chromosomes. That means things get even more complex.
Oh, they do. We need to talk about individuals with 48 chromosomes, for instance, 48,000 XXY.
What are the implications there?
The challenges can be quite significant. There's a high risk of ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, and the sources really stress this. There's a serious, elevated risk of suicide if proper psychological counseling and support aren't provided early on. Intervention is critical.
That's sobering. And what about 48,000 XXYY, sometimes called double male?
Yeah, that presents a different cluster of risks. These individuals have a much higher chance of serious metabolic problems, type 2 diabetes, issues with lipids. They also often deal with chronic venous insufficiency, leading to varicose veins, even ulcers. Developmentally, delays in language and reading are common, learning difficulties too, and usually lifelong infertility.
Wow. Okay, the complexity ramps up again when we get to chimerism or mosaics. What exactly is that?
This is probably the most mind-bending finding. Chimerism means a single person has different sets of chromosomes, different karyotypes in different parts of their body, different cell lines living together.
So wait, like some cells could be 45X and other cells in the same person could be 46XY.
Precisely that. They're essentially built from, you could say, 2 or more different phonetic blueprints coexisting.
That's incredible.
It really is. And sometimes it's even 3 different cell lines. The sources mention cases like 45X46, XX47, XXY, all in one individual.
So how does the body decide? How does the person present physically?
That depends entirely on the ratio and distribution of those cell lines, particularly which karyotype ends up dominating in the gonads, the sex organ.
Okay, so using your example, if someone is 45X, 46XY, but the 45X cells are dominant in their gonads.
They might present with features very similar to Turner syndrome. It's all about which cell line takes the lead in those critical developmental tissues. In the most extreme cases, some chimeras show what's called dual sexual development, having characteristics or even organs associated with both sexes.
And how many types of these mosaics are documented?
The sources we looked at compile 16 distinct types of chimeric variations based on different combinations of cell lines.
Okay, so let's recap. We have the foundational 4, then the 2 48 chromosome types, and now 16 mosaic types. That's 22 variations based purely on chromosome structure.
Correct. That covers the variations rooted directly in the karyotype itself, but now we need to shift focus. Because sex development can still take a different path, even if someone has a completely typical 46XY or 46XX karyotype.
So this is where genes and hormones come into play more directly.
Exactly. This brings us 4 more major types of DSD caused by specific gene mutations or breakdowns in hormonal pathways.
Let's start with androgen insensitivity syndrome, AIS. First described systematically back in 1954, I believe.
That's right. Now, these individuals are chromosomally male, 46XY. Their bodies produce androgens, the male hormones, just fine. The problem discovered much later in the 80s, lies with the receptors for those hormones.
So the message is being sent, but nobody's listening.
That's a perfect analogy. A mutation in a specific gene, the AR gene, means the body's androgen receptors either don't work properly or don't work at all. They're insensitive.
And the result?
Because the body can't respond to the male hormones it's making, development follows a default female pathway externally. So you can have a 46XY individual with a completely typical female external appearance, or in partial AI's cases, incomplete masculinization. It shows the receptor pathway is just as crucial as the chromosomes.
Fascinating. Then there's Diller-Chappelle syndrome, the ultimate genetic puzzle maybe. Outwardly male, but genetically 46XX, female chromosome.
Yeah, this one baffled scientists for a while. The solution came from tracking down the genes. It turns out the SRY gene, the master switch for male development, usually found only on the Y chromosome, had somehow gotten transferred onto one of the X chromosomes during sperm or egg formation.
So an XX individual accidentally gets the start male development instruction.
Exactly. That misplaced SRY gene kicks off the male pathway tests develop. They produce androgens leading to a male phenotype, despite the XX karyotype.
Okay, shifting now to hormone and enzyme issues. This brings us to that incredible story from the Dominican Republic in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Children born appearing female who then changed at puberty.
It sounds almost like folklore, but it's scientifically documented. Julianne and Perodo McGinley studied these cases. The cause was a deficiency in an enzyme called 5-reductase 2.
What does that enzyme normally do?
It converts testosterone, T, into a much more potent androgen called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, particularly during fetal development. And DHT is absolutely essential for the full external masculinization of the genitals before birth.
So without enough DHT,
the external genitals look underdeveloped, often appearing female or ambiguous at birth. But then puberty hits, and the surge of testosterone is so massive, so powerful, it sort of overwhelms the enzyme deficiency.
it's enough on its own to drive masculinization later.
Yes, it triggers this dramatic delayed masculinization. The body finally catches up, in a way.
Incredible. And the last one in this category, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, CAH. This is kind of the reverse scenario happening in the womb.
Precisely. Here you have a 46XX fetus, chromosomally female, but they develop external genitalia that appears male.
Why does that happen?
It's usually due to a deficiency in a different enzyme, 21-hydroxylase. When this enzyme isn't working right, certain precursor hormones build up and get shunted into producing excessive amounts of androgens.
And those excess androgens masculinize the female fetus's genitals.
Correct, while still in utero.
Okay. Yeah. Let's pull this all together then. We've covered the 22 chromosomal variations, plus these 4 gene and hormone pathway variations, AIS, Diller-Chappelle, 5-reductase deficiency, and CAH.
That brings us to 26 distinct developmental paths that differ from the typical male or female pattern. And if you add the standard 46XY male and 46XX female pathways back in,
that's where the 28 documented variations come from.
That's the number outlined in our sources, yes. 28 distinct ways biological sex development can unfold.
You know, given that complexity, it feels really inadequate to use terms like abnormality or disorder. They sound judgmental.
I agree. And the medical community recognized that. Back in 2006, major medical societies in the US and Europe came together and issued a consensus statement. They proposed unifying these conditions under a new umbrella term, differences of sex development, or DSD.
DSD. Differences. That sounds much more neutral.
That was the goal. The consensus explicitly states these are caused by natural variations in chromosomes, gonad development, hormone pathways, receptors. It reframes them
as just differences, part of natural biological diversity.
Exactly. Not inherently right or wrong, just different outcomes of a complex natural process. And importantly, the sources emphasize that sex differentiation isn't something that just finishes at birth. It's a lifelong process, influenced by hormones changing over time. Biological sex is described almost like a flowing river, not a fixed point.
Let's circle back to those numbers one last time because they're really striking. The narrow definition variations you can actually see at birth, that's quite rare, right? About 0.02%.
Yes, very rare visually at birth. But the broad definition, the one encompassing all these variations in chromosomes, hormones, receptors we've discussed, that figure holds steady at around 2%.
Still 160 million people globally. It really underscores how much we maybe don't know or don't appreciate about the complexity of human biology.
Absolutely. Our understanding is still evolving.
So the main takeaway for you listening is this. The human body is incredibly resilient, complex, and frankly still quite mysterious. When we know there are at least 28 documented ways sex development can proceed, the common societal idea that everyone fits neatly into just two boxes, well, it just doesn't hold up scientifically.
It really calls for a shift in perspective, doesn't it? Our sources propose that a truly advanced, truly civilized society is one that embraces complexity, that allows for this kind of natural variation. Instead of viewing these differences as exceptions, maybe we should consider every individual as their own unique standard. And that leaves you with a pretty profound question to think about. What would it actually mean for our society, our culture, our laws, our medicine to operate with the understanding that 28 or maybe even more forms of biological sex are possible, are natural? It suggests we need to approach each other not with fear or exclusion, but with real compassion and a willingness to understand that complexity.